Thank you for joining us. My name is Eric Miller. I am the Director of Ministry Operations with CE National. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to do another digital lab. We are here with Mark and Kristin Artrip. Mark is the lead pastor at Movement Church. He's repping his gear there. Thanks, Mark, for doing that. That's awesome. Kristin missed the memo, I guess. And I'm still waiting for my t-shirt. So thanks for that. So
in the mail, I promise.
All right. Well, we're excited about talking about today a guide to dating. This is not designed for students. Students, you're welcome to watch this. We actually have Facebook and are interested in dating. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. But really, we're today, and to any youth workers who may have questions about talking to students in the world of dating. If you know of a teenager, maybe you're a parent of a teenager, or you're a youth pastor, youth worker, volunteer in student ministry, we hope that this conversation will be of great benefit to you. CE National exists to help believers live on mission for Christ, and so this is a part of that conversation. And we're sad that we had to cancel Momentum Youth Conference this year because of coronavirus. We're very sad. You probably all know Mark from the Mark and Dave show at Momentum. Mark, do you even know that we were trying to find like videos of you guys from way back when?
Of the Mark and Dave show?
Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, there wasn't a lot of video taken back then, and I'm okay with that. We were working. We haven't been professional at any point. Even before we figured out our shtick, those videos would be embarrassing. So I'm glad they don't exist.
Man, there are some videos that you guys have made. So during July, students and youth workers, check out the Momentum website. We created a YouTube playlist of the best of Momentum. So you'll be sure to see some old school Mark and Dave videos. So my personal favorite is Dave Ranks Tan. That's
true. It's got a timeless feel that's just hard to replicate.
There you go. Anything that pokes fun at Dave or Ed Lewis or any of that is good by me. So I love it.
Yeah.
Well, the Artrips are in right outside of Columbus, Ohio. Mark has been a youth pastor. Mark is now the lead pastor. They're planting churches like crazy. It's been awesome to see. Mark and Kristin have 4 kids. Malachi, this blew my mind a minute ago, is 12 years old, their oldest. But they have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So we're excited about having them on today. And honestly, our goal for this conversation is really to equip anyone working with teenagers or parents of teenagers to help them better understand the world of dating. Look, our culture is crazy today, and how do our students develop healthy boundaries in dating that include biblical principles? Some of that just gets thrown out the window in our culture, and so we want to engage in this conversation. We hope that it's of great value to you. If you're joining us live on Zoom and you're in the chat room here, there's a Q&A box that you can type a question in, and if you're on Facebook, and you're watching this conversation, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your questions. Give us your feedback. Ask away, and those questions will get to us here on Zoom. So thanks for joining us. Let's dive in here into our topic. Mark, why don't you just, even Kristin, shares kind of your history. How did you guys meet? What was your dating experience? Mark, I know you're like a professional matchmaker. Kind of talk through some of that.
Yeah. Well, we met when we were 17. We met on an Operation Barnabas team, and everyone that's ever been on an Operation Barnabas team knows that you're not supposed to flirt or date on an Operation Barnabas team. And so I know at Momentum, I'm probably up front being crazy and wild and whatever, but I've always been pretty principled, I guess, when it comes to dating. And so as I was growing up in youth group and going through youth group, I remember like one of our youth workers one time, a guy named OJ, had us write down what we were looking for in a spouse. And he said, hang that on your wall and look for that. Don't compromise that. You always say, oh, I want someone, we used to always joke. I always said I wanted a girl who could beat me in one-on-one in basketball, but but it was more important stuff than that. I was like, I want someone that loves Jesus, someone that wants to do ministry, someone who is so beautiful that people would say they're out of my league, you know, and so you start checking those things off. And I remember my first conversation with Kristin. I wasn't supposed to be looking for a wife or flirting. But it was like literally the first time in my life when I was like, I'm mentally going through the list because I'm a list guy. And I actually remember sitting on a bus and having this moment of like, whoa, that's the whole list. You know what I mean? And because I had had that standard written down, kind of thinking, all right, yeah, you know, maybe this is something here. So I was probably pretty weird in that when I was 17, I could have told you what I was going to do with my whole life. You know, I always said like, I want to get married. I want to be a student pastor. I want to plant churches. And that's kind of been the plan that we've been working under. So when I met Kristin, it took me a while to trick her into dating me, because I'm not a very good looking guy. Let's be honest. She had to compromise in that, but I wore her down eventually. And so we started dating knowing that we were kind of headed down the same path, wanting to be in ministry. And so we started dating at the end of high school. You know, you don't use words like marriage, I guess, when you're in high school, or people think you're weird, and you probably would be, but we knew we were dating with purpose and it was leading somewhere. And so we dated on through college, got engaged the last year of college, and got married right after. So that's kind of our story. And I do like to set people up on blind dates. I like love a lot. And so people always think like, why do you want to do that? And I've loved being married to my best friend, and I want that same thing for other people. So yeah, if you hang out with us long enough, we'll put you on a blind date. We've set up 5 marriages, and we have a couple currently dating. Here's hoping it's the 6th. So that's a little pet hobby of ours. Maybe I missed something, or maybe Kristin wants to tell the story better from her angle.
You did good.
There you go. So once you get to like 10 or a dozen, are you going to start like an online dating service, or how does that work?
I have made all the couples I've set up. When I get to 10, I'm going to get them all together at our house and take a family picture, I call it. So, and they've all agreed to it, and that's my goal. 10's my life goal, so I'm hoping I can get there, but I've had a real dry spell recently.
Nice.
So if you or someone you know is single, email me, please.
Oh, that's awesome. So Kristin, kind of walk us through even like what's your guys' history? I know with doing premarital counseling, Mark's officiated a lot of these weddings. That's kept him in business. Even your experience in dating, in the dating context within your guys' ministry. What does that look like?
You know, I think back, you know, we were joking about all knowing each other in college and back in high school. And, you know, I think the dating scene, you know, for us, you look back 20, 22 years ago that I mean, we were 17. It was so different. I mean, cell phones, I mean, when I say they didn't exist, they didn't really exist. Dial-up internet had just started, and you were lucky if you had that. And so, you know, you think back to just the concept of dating. It was so much more, I mean, you had to call each other on the phone. You had to drive to see each other in person. So there was so much more, I don't know, like that in-person dating time. And so I think, you know, we've watched it evolve over 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. And, you know, I have to almost now like train myself in like the new ways of dating, because it's so different. I mean, nowadays there isn't, you know, we've had someone tell us like they had to make a rule with their, you know, boyfriend they were dating, that they had to talk on the phone so many times a week, because that's like a foreign concept. You text, or you know, it's something like that where it's like even the concept of sitting down face to face and getting to know someone, that's not normal anymore. It's texting, it's messaging, it's, you know, it's accounts online where you meet people. So I think, you know, for us, it was so much more like you have to drive to that person in person, take a walk, have a conversation. And so, yeah, I think over the years, as, you know, we've watched our students date back in the day, we have, you know, friends, adults dating. I think we've had to retrain ourselves in a way on what does it look like to date right now. Because it is different. It's not the same. It's going to be different for my kids. And so, you know, our journey was way more face to face and sitting down. And taking a walk. And yeah, now it's not that, it's texting. It's, so I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think it's just a constant, following the trends as much as you don't want to, knowing the apps, knowing the trends, knowing what teenagers are even trying to process nowadays. Cause it's really different. It's a learning curve for sure.
Yeah. Mark, anything to add there?
No, I was going to say, to piggyback what she said. I mean, I think the principles are always the same, and yet, like she said, the execution is completely different. I mean, this makes us sound old, but I remember when we started dating, we did live a couple hours apart, and so we'd come home from school and get on AOL Instant Messenger, and that was our texting, and that was like the thing. And the only reason you did that is because it was like $1 a minute to call each other, so no one could afford that, So. But yeah, it's like now if you say you do instant messenger in a relationship, people are like, what decade do you live in? And then for a while it was like, oh, we email, whatever. And now people pick up a phone and FaceTime, or they text all day. But yeah, I think it is, a matter of saying like, okay, so what are the things you're looking for in dating? What do you want dating to accomplish? And how do you find that regardless of where culture or where technology is? And that's been something we've had to navigate, because there was a time that dating apps were considered scandalous. And now, I look at college people, single people in our church, 40% of marriages they're meeting on dating apps. And so the days are gone when you can say that a dating app is inherently wrong. Now, having said that, we know that there are dating apps that are shady, and we know that there are dating apps that you can get into a lot of trouble in. And so, just like a blind date 50 years ago, you wouldn't go on a blind date unless you met them in a public place because you didn't know their character. There's same ways that you have to make sure you're doing your due diligence and using dating apps with wisdom and guarding your principles. But yeah, it's just a matter of knowing where culture is and how the Bible and how the gospel still plays into where culture is currently.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like the dynamics can change throughout the years, and yet the heart of it is exactly the same. So let's kind of define our terms here before we get too far into the conversation. Like when you guys think dating, what are some of those key components that go into that? Like what does that mean for you guys?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you some here. And I think, like I said, I'm pretty opinionated on this topic and probably most topics. So I'm not trying to make anyone mad, but I believe that dating is for marriage. And now when I say that, I think sometimes people think I'm like, one of the Duggars or something. I've got this like, oh, you need to be engaged on date number 2. I'm not saying that. But I think that, you're not going to find dating principles in Scripture. Here's what you're going to find. God gives us his definition of marriage. And he says, Genesis 2:24, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. And so God kind of says, here's where you are. And then he says, here's the end goal of where dating can and should lead. And so I think the purpose of dating is just to walk that path toward marriage. It doesn't mean that you get engaged on date number 2. But it also means that you don't walk off that path. I think one of the simple things that it's in there is says that the two are going to become one flesh. That a healthy sex life is going to be part of marriage someday. And so the place that we get our ethic or a rule that you don't have sex until you're married is because as you walk that path between love and marriage, you're guarding that future goal. You're guarding what you're going to give to your spouse. And there are people that would say, like, no, I'm just worried about the relationship. And I think the difference for a Christian is if that goal is up ahead, every step you take is not just to survive or to get by in that day, but to keep walking toward that goal of, all right, this is what marriage is going to look like if God ordains it.
Yeah. Yeah, so probably just the fact that you gave a biblical perspective there. If any students are watching, they're probably now off. They've left. So
yeah, and I think that's tough to hear, but I completely agree. I mean, if I were to say that to your average 14-year-old, they're like, "Thanks, I'll be over here flirting with my friend." And yet, I think there's a correlation. you might know that you're attracted to someone, you might know you're interested in someone, but until you can look at God's design and say, hey, God drew this box and I'm going to stay inside of it, you might not be ready to lead yourself. You might not be ready to lead someone else. And that doesn't mean you don't have attraction, but it just means you might not be able to date with purpose. And so I'm not saying that, I'm not going to draw one of those lines like, oh, you can't date till you're 30. But I think, I'll sound like a hypocrite since I met my spouse at 17, but I think most people would agree that they're not meeting their spouse and taking mature steps toward a God ordained marriage at 14. And so I think you do have to think of some of those things, and it doesn't mean that you can't meet people and you can't network and have fun and get to know people and have friends. But I think you also have to know, hey, I might not be ready for everything that's ahead,
Okay, so if that's your definition, then for dating, kind of take that the next step. What's a healthy dating relationship look like? How would you define that? What are some applicable things that would go into that?
Yeah, man, I would. I always love to go to 1 Corinthians 13. I guess just because I think that there's a few things God has defined, and I think one of the things He's defined is here's what it looks like to love a person. Now, again, you don't have to be in love on date number 1 and profess your love to someone. But I also think it's our job to take care of each other, to invest in each other, to get to know each other, and still stay on that path as we walk toward what might be the end result that God would have. So 1 Corinthians 13, I mean, this is a famous one that gets read at every wedding, but it's love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of being wrong. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. So I think as you live life, you want to stay in the boundaries of that. Now, obviously, that sounds very, very spiritual and old-fashioned as you read those verses. It doesn't give etiquette for how to have a text conversation, but it does say you shouldn't be proud or rude. Here's how you should treat someone, and here's how your spouse is going to want to be treated someday. And so I think everything you do, from group hangouts to text conversations to how you celebrate anniversaries or the presents you give or the, your rules for hanging out alone, I think they all have to have that definition of love in mind. I think sometimes it's hard to define what good dating looks like, but I think we all know when someone messes up. And an example in that would be, sometimes people say, oh, couples that are dating should never kiss or should never do fill in the blank thing. And that those verses say, love does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices when the truth wins out. If someone loves you that's dating you and they're caring about you and your long-term relationships, they shouldn't want to drag you outside of the boundaries that God has. And so I think dating is getting to know each other, growing together, and not ruining the long-term prospect or the long-term goal that God's taking you toward. And that's a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Some people only date in groups. Some people, like Kristin said, don't want to have a text relationship. Some people only have a text relationship. But I think the goal would be, how can we stay on the path that God has for us?
Yeah. So Kristin, you're a mom. You have 2 boys and 2 girls. What as a parent do you describe, or how would you define to your kids what this dating process is? You've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old. You guys may be beginning to broach those conversations. So for some of our parents, kind of walk them through, what are those conversations looking like for you guys, or how would you encourage that with our parents?
I mean, like I said, so many different families have so many different, views. Malachi's a 7th grader, and already, the terms boyfriend and girlfriend are thrown around, and, oh, I'm dating that girl. Oh, that, that boy's dating that girl. And so I think that we're pretty vocal in our house about just like marriage and dating, but we're not naive as to think like, oh, our boys or girls are going to come home one day and say somebody's cute. I mean, that's going to happen. We've just kind of stress the importance of it, of just the long-term goal is marriage. And so we've kind of told our kids, like right now, like, you know, in junior high, I'm like, we don't use the term boyfriend and girlfriend. You're not going to be dating someone. It's your chance to make a lot of friends, to make good friends, to, you know, have all your friends over, hang out in groups. But, you know, we don't, honestly, like, we just don't, you know, do the whole, like, that's your girlfriend, that's your boyfriend, you're going to date, I don't know. And we've, you know, told the boys, you know, our goal isn't that you date in high school. Cause like we were saying earlier, it's really hard to trace couples back to high school and say, oh, that was really successful, or that didn't end in disaster. And so, you know, we've kind of, and like I said, it's hard because we met at 17. We were juniors going to be seniors. So, you know, but yeah, we try to tell our kids, like, this is, you know, you're not at 14, 16, and 17 just setting out to find a wife. You're setting out to make friends and to be a good friend. And we're not going to worry about the term boyfriend and girlfriend and taking somebody to the movies and being alone in a basement. Like, that's not our goal. And so, yeah, we've just stressed, I think it's just that long-term goal of marriage, and that, you know, when it's time to date, you know, hopefully as a parent we'll say, like, you know what, I think you're mature enough to know what that is and ask that girl on a date, or, you know, say yes to that boy on a date. But yeah, I mean, we're a little more conservative in that, like, you know, not throwing around boyfriend and girlfriend in junior high and high school, and letting our kids just run off to the movies with anybody. And, you know, we kind of just emphasize more, you know, grow your character, you know, make good friends, be a friend. Don't worry about, you know, kissing girls and kissing boys.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, because I think I can even speak and give you guys credibility. I knew you guys in high school, and we went to college together. And so you were spiritually mature. You guys did have good boundaries, where you had those things put in place, that allowed your relationship to develop through high school and into college, where you're, like Mark, you already talked about, you had those goals, you had those things put in place, and that helped. And so that's kind of what we're trying to say. Like, we want to encourage parents. So you guys, I don't think, have to feel bad that you met each other in high school and it worked. Like, that's a good, healthy model, right? So be encouraged by that. Yeah.
And I think some of the things that helped us, you know, I always think, like, when you're 17 or 18 or 20 and you're in those settings where dating becomes something, I think one of the things that at least helped me or helped us is, like, you know, look around at the couples that are a step ahead of you, that you think, you know, they're doing it right. So what is it that they're doing that makes, you know, purity a successful thing in their relationship, or, you know, headed towards a healthy marriage? And, you know, one of our best friends, you know, their boundary was, well, it was more put in place by her family when she was growing up as a teenager, but their boundary was, you know, for them at 10:30, no matter what date night, what thing is going on, the cutoff was 10:30, and he would leave her house, period, done. Like, our boundary is 10:30, no matter what we're doing, no matter who's over, I'm leaving. And that was like, they did that for all their kids. Like, they set that boundary of, like, when you're on a date or when you're dating, like, you make a line, you both commit to it. You don't, and I mean, Mark can probably, I mean, and so I remember when we were watching them walk through that, we're like, oh man, that is a great idea. And, like, you know, even when we were engaged in adults, you know, we put that same thing in place. Like, you know, nothing good happens after midnight. So, you know, I don't know. So things like that, where it's like, you look around and you look up and you say, like, who's doing it right? And go talk to them, go ask questions. Like, what are the things they're putting in place that make it so successful?
Yeah.
Yeah. Midnight becomes 10:30. And then for you guys with your kids, 10:30 becomes 9. Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're roughly in bed at like 8:15 now. So we're very cool. But,
Now, so let's dive a little deeper into some of these. There's a ton of dating philosophies out there. You guys know there are books that have been written, some that are good, some that have caused damage and destruction within Christian subculture. What factors would you encourage anyone looking to begin dating or to have and hold on to? What are those dating philosophies that are important? Like, I'll give you one for me that I've tried to live by. When I was a youth pastor, I would encourage students, like, and Kristin, you were kind of starting to say this, but to be friends first, right? When you think you like that girl or you think you like that guy and you want to date and you want them to be your boyfriend or girlfriend, like, get to know them. I would always say be friends first, right?
Yeah.
Get to know them. Spend, if you've only known them for 6 weeks and it's the second month of school and you just met them, like, give it till the end of the school year, right? Give it some time. Be their friend first. Get to know them, their character, that kind of stuff. So what are other, like, philosophies that you guys would have?
I think that's a huge one, just to circle back. I mean, people are always like, oh, I want to date them and get to know them. And I'm like, that's not called dating. That's called friendship. And yeah, people think like, oh, if I want to spend time with someone or have a conversation with them, we've got to go one-on-one to the movies. And it's like, no, you just got to say, hey, are you going to that basketball game? Let's sit by each other, or end up sitting by them. Like, people don't realize that friendship, if dating is 1 to 10, friendship is like 1 to 6. Like, you can get to know someone, you can get to know their character, you can get to know their family, you can get to know their history, you can see their emotions. There's a lot of things you can learn through friendship. And there is a point that you might say, okay, I'm still attracted to that person, and I want to get to know them on a deeper level. I think another principle I would say is to get to the point that you want to date someone, you have to know what you want. I've seen people who, they're like, I want to date a girl. And I'm like, and that's about all they can tell you, and so, when I was looking for Kristin, I mean, I had that list. I remember I wrote it on a piece of cardboard on my wall, but it said, like, someone that loves Jesus, someone that loves their family, someone that wants to have a family. Later on in high school, I knew I wanted someone that felt a call into ministry. But, I knew I wanted someone who could, teach my kids to play sports. They were competitive and driven enough to want to do that, but also fun enough to want to sit at, 5-year-olds baseball games that are awful. And, so my dad always told us, like, you can tell how someone's going to treat you as a spouse by looking at how they treat their parents. And you can tell how they're going to raise your kids by looking at how they interact with their siblings. So I think some principles, like you said, just watch that person and watch their life. And even as you progress to dating, if you know what you want, look for the indicators of that and see those things. If you say you want to date someone that loves Jesus and you meet this person and they're like, yeah, I used to go to church. Again, sometimes there are transitions and churches split, weird things happen. But if someone hasn't been in biblical community for 2 years, they might not have the walk that you want with Christ. And so, sometimes I think it's just a matter of looking at them in friendship. And then as you see the things that take you to the next step, then you trace those down. And sometimes in the next step, you won't see what you want. I've had friends that are like, wow, they're not the person I thought they were. And that's okay. The purpose of dating is to find out if you can marry someone. And sometimes the answer is no, but dating still accomplished its purpose, and so those are some of the things I think, just to know what you want and then look for indicators of that in someone's character and life at the different phases you're in.
And Mark, even to that level, I think you're exactly right. Like, you talked earlier about that list of things. And I'm sure that you saw this on your list. There are things that are non-negotiable. Bethany always, my wife, used the analogy of, like, she had a list and there were things that were written in stone, in permanent marker, and in pencil, right? And so there are things that, like, I want somebody with brown hair. Well, maybe that's something written in pencil, right? And that's very negotiable, right? Or maybe because, I want somebody.
We both swore that we would never marry a redhead. That was like, when you're a redhead, you're like, oh man, I got to marry a brunette because I want my kids to be tan. And, like that was, that's what we both thought. And here we are, God laughed at us. But I think, to your point, I knew that I wanted someone who was, who loved Jesus, who was selfless, who wanted to live a ministry lifestyle, who loved their family, who would pour themselves out for their family in the church, and someone who thought I was hilarious and would fill my ego every day with laughing at my jokes, And so, yeah, when I thought I wanted to date a brunette, and then I thought, you know what, we can do blondish redhead. Let's go here. Yeah, those things were written in pencil, and some of them didn't matter, but yeah, the others are non-negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Kristin, what about you? What are some of those philosophies of dating that you think are important to implement and to encourage in these relationships?
Oh man. I think, I don't know, I might be rabbit trailing on this one, but I think about when you're dating, if this is in the context of like a Christian relationship, I think about purity being this like huge thing, right, over everyone. I've realized watching, whether it's adults we know dating, teenagers, college students, I think that I've realized I'm like, if there are not core beliefs that you hold and the other person, I've realized that if things like purity are not a core belief, those are like the things we're talking about that are written in permanent marker.
Yep.
Those quickly become a thing written in pencil, and quickly those things are negotiable. People negotiate those out of the deal. I can't believe how fast most couples, take purity from that permanent marker and take it to a pencil. And so, I think I don't know. I think the big principle is like, if you're walking with Jesus, something, purity has to be a core belief, and it has to be a core belief in your partner. And if it's not, I hardly know any couples where it's truly not the core of who they are, walking with Jesus, remain pure. I think it's probably very low percentage of that will happen. So I think that's maybe just my biggest one is, the walking with Jesus in purity has to be truly deeply rooted in your heart and in the other person, where you both say, like, I remember Mark and I, even at 18 years old and 19, we both said, like, we're both committed to being pure when we're married. So I'm telling you right now, don't ask. Don't ask. It's, and we knew at 17 or 18, we knew we weren't going to get married till we were graduated out of college. So we knew right then we were on a 4.5-year track. That's a long time, right? And so we said at the beginning, even as 18-year-olds, you are mature enough to have that conversation. It was, don't ask me, because it is, it is a core value. And the same for him. Don't ask me. So I think that immediately put us at ease, knowing that, like, this boy is not going to be asking me or pressuring me into something he already knows it's not happening until we're married. So we need to find a way to get to know each other, to date, to love each other, that doesn't involve taking purity from a permanent marker and making it a pencil. And so I don't know, I kind of rabbit trailed there, but.
No, that's perfect. That's a great example. Yeah, it's an important one.
And I was going to say, I think something that's tough for parents and youth leaders, youth pastors that are watching this, maybe. I don't think the church and the evangelical Christian has done a great job of, I read that picture of marriage at the end. And sometimes when you're 15, all students are hearing is, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't think about sex. Don't think about sex. Obviously this is a delicate balance, but I think sometimes we can let them know, like, hey, God created sex, and sex in marriage is awesome. No one's saying anything other than that. It's worth saving yourself for, and the reward is going to be worth that. When we drive our kids to Cedar Point with 12, 10, 7, and 5-year-old, 3-hour drive, it's awful. They're fighting, they're slapping each other the whole way, but we're doing it and they're doing it. They're sweating in the car, and we're like, we're going to Cedar Point. There's that reward and there's that design at the end. I think sometimes we just have to know that, like, we're not just spiritually guilt tripping people and being Pharisees and saying, hey, don't think about sex, don't think about sex, don't think about sex, don't look at pornography, don't think about sex. But we're guarding with the end result in mind. And I think, sometimes we act like God hasn't designed this incredible gift that's going to be worth it. And sometimes I think it's just a matter of painting that picture for your kids, for your students, and saying, hey, we're not, the goal is not that you have to be pure your whole life, or the goal is not that just for the sake of this religious rule, you're following it. The goal is God has made something better than any one of your friends that's having sex right now is experiencing, that any of these other relationships are experiencing. And we want to keep our eyes on that long-term goal and keep our eyes on the prize. And then I think that makes it different. If we just said to our kids, hey, we're going to get in the car and drive around, how long do we have to do this? Why do we have to do this? Where are we going? And if I say we're going to Cedar Point, they can say, all right, I'm going to close my eyes for 90 minutes and this is going to be worth it, And so I think sometimes it's just a matter of like reminding them like, hey, God didn't do this to bother you. God gave you this incredible gift because he loves you, because you're going to know the greatest intimacy that we can know on earth, and it's going to be worth it. So sometimes you just have to point to that end result. And hopefully they see that in our marriage. Hopefully our kids see that, we don't talk about our sex life, but I think they can see that we love each other, that we're best friends, that we spend time together, and that marriage is an incredible gift.
And I think you're exactly right, because anyone who's ever worked with teenagers, they know the number one question that a student's going to ask is, well, how far is too far? And I'm sure all three of us have had the conversation of that's the wrong question. Yeah. Because you're looking at it of how close to the line am I biblically allowed to get where God will still and that's a wrong perspective. It's more of, like Mark, what you're saying, like look at it from the opposite end and understand that this is something that God has designed, and it's a gift that he's given to us because he loves us. And yet how do we then work backwards from that and guard that, protect it, to make sure that we are living lives of holiness, that we're engaging in relationship the way that God has designed us to. And any student can look at their friends and see, or any student that's messed up in those areas, they know the guilt that comes with that. They know the negative emotions. They know the drama that comes. They know all of those negative things are not the blessing and the positive side of which God's designed us for. So I think you're exactly right. We have to work backwards. Yeah.
And there can be, I think sometimes we shame people. We want to know that there's grace in that and that God redeems those things. But yeah, it is important to think no one ever gets married and says, man, I wish I would have gone to third base more often when I was in high school. I mean, you don't say that. There's, and that's that, regardless of if you even believe in God or if you even want to live a biblically centered life. Married people do not say, I wish I would have had more partners and fooled around more in college. Like that's not the narrative. And so, yeah, regardless, you can look at that and say, all right, I've got to think with the end goal in mind and not think in the here and now and being patient.
Yeah. And when you do have those conversations, Kristin, you were mentioning the people, who are a step or two in relationship ahead of you. If you're a dating couple and you're serious about marriage, sit down with a married couple and ask them those questions that, Mark, you're referencing. Like, they're going to tell you, like, those things have baggage and they cause, things that you have to work through and heal from. And so the more of that you add into your marriage and your relationship, the harder it's going to be. And so you're actually doing yourself a favor when you can set up good, healthy boundaries, navigate all of that well.
Yeah. And I think Kristin's, my church didn't always have a ton of young couples I was able to watch, but I think her friend, she had we were dating and we knew a couple that was engaged, and they had a friend, they were like the ones that were 4 years older, they were married. And so they'd all go over to their house and see, oh, this is what a young marriage looks like. And this is what we're building toward. This is what we're waiting on. And so I think her friend group did that well to say, all right, who's at the next phase that I want to pattern myself after, and what do I respect about them, and what do I need to do now to be on that path?
So how can you guys speak into the parents who are trying to shepherd their students through this, the youth leaders, the youth pastors, that the people who are coming alongside of teenagers and they want to engage in these conversations? We know that teenagers, it's rare that a student's going to come to you and say, hey, tell me about dating. Like, but they have questions. How do we engage in healthy conversation? How can adults broach these conversations or step into it, into a sensitive area?
I'll say this quick. I think what's important, and something my dad did well. I mean, I hope I don't just sound like a guy giving advice. I think my dad did very well in this area. Is and you might not have this ability, but he started the conversation young. So he started the conversation at 10, 12. These conversations all link together. Hey, your body's going to be changing, and you're going to hit a growth spurt, and you're going to, find yourself caring more about girls, and and I've tried to do that with our boys, where I'm starting that conversation early. I wanted to have the talk with them they say the average boy sees pornography for the first time at age 9 now. And I wanted to talk to my boys before anyone else did. So I was pumped up. I had the family life weekend to remember curriculum. And I took Malachi away, and I quickly realized, although our world is at a point where you need to talk some quick bullet points with a 9-year-old. Hey, if you see this, you can't talk about everything. And what I realized is that's a yearly ongoing conversation. You want to tell a 9-year-old that pornography exists. You want to tell a 10-year-old that his body's going to change. You want to tell a 12-year-old that, hey, you're going to find yourself caring about girls, but I want you to long-term care about who you're going to marry. You don't have to date someone at 12. And then when they start dating someone anyway at age 14, you think, all right, how are we living out God's definition of love in their life? And so my principle would just be that it's an ongoing conversation. And I think the mistake some people make is, they wait till their kid's 17 and has clearly hit puberty and is dating. And they're like, well, time to talk about safe sex. And it's like, you have no role in your kid's life. You have no relationship, and your kid doesn't care what you think. And so, I've mentioned my dad had an ongoing conversation with me, my youth leader. I made that list when I was in 6th grade of what I was looking for in a spouse, which is funny, but at the same time, I made that list with him in 6th grade. So when I met Kristin, I couldn't wait to introduce him to Kristin, because we had talked about that for 5 and 6 years. And I think the best thing that parents can do is start the conversations involving, love, sex, your body and changes and all those things early, and make it an ongoing conversation. So it's not just a confrontation. We've all worked for a boss. If you have a relationship with them and they come in and they say, hey, I noticed you've been coming to work 5 minutes late. That's different if you have a relationship than whether, it's the guy coming down from 2 stories up that he's your boss's boss. And he's like, hey, you got to shape up, and you're like, I don't know this guy. We don't know each other. So I think just ongoing relationship is a huge part of the solution.
Yeah.
Kristin, so then speak into, Mark's kind of addressing it as a parent where you can develop those relationships, but maybe as somebody that's in ministry, what does that look like? How can adults help come alongside of teens and have these discussions, encourage them in these things? If you're a youth worker, if you're a youth pastor, if you're, a volunteer within a student ministry, what does that look like?
I mean, I look back to my own experience, and quality time. I mean, the youth workers that were in my church, it was a constant, all the girls came over, and, we had, sleepovers, we did nails and whatever. And they would talk about, those conversations would come up about dating or being single. One of the youth workers is, she's been lifelong single. And she did the same thing. It didn't matter that she wasn't dating, but yeah, I think it was just that constant pour out. We were always going to Speedway to grab cappuccinos in the winter, or we were always going to Dairy Queen. We were always having sleepovers. They were just, they kind of it was just that constant trickle in your life. And because I think you grow to love those people, those conversations begin very naturally when you're spending time with, your youth workers or your leaders. So I think if it's you're a volunteer youth, or you are the youth pastor or the wife, I think it's just carving out time and just saying, I'm going to have these girls over. I'm going to take these guys out to go, you know, I don't know, golfing is probably a dumb example, but you know, something where it's like, you're just carving out little bits of time to create relationships, because sometimes, you know, these students don't always have the ear of their parent, whether it's one parent or two parents, they don't have that ear. And so you become the ear, and you become the person that listens. And, you know, I think, you know, when Mark was talking about my friend group, you know, we had like 3 couples older than us, or 4. And I look back and think, man, most of the things that I drew out of my experience, whether it was my viewpoint on dating or marriage or just being a teenager, probably came more from my youth leaders than it did from like maybe directly in my home.
Do you think that was because they're, you know, you're saying spending quality time, but they're asking intentional questions of you, right? They're, and it's maybe not just on the topic of dating, but they're asking, hey, how can we be praying for you, or other intentional.
You're just, you know, you're just doing life together. It's nothing crazy. You know, I think about discipleship. I'm like, we were not always just sitting in a circle with our Bibles open and in these serious conversations. It was just, we just lived life together. We just went out and did fun things. We went rollerblading. We went to Speedway. It wasn't always so intense. It was just asking the simple questions, asking about the friends you're making at school, asking about the sports and the team and the relationships you're building. Are you being a good friend? Yeah, I think it's all of it. It doesn't always have to be so intense. It can just be asking the simple life questions. Who's your best friend at school and why? And, you know, you start to learn a lot about somebody when, you know, they let you into who their friends are and why they're friends and what boy they like and why do they like that boy. And I don't know. So yeah, I think it's just simple.
That's what I was going to say. I think, you know, sometimes we think asking questions, it becomes this like intervention. You know, you sit them down and you're like, have you kissed a boy yet? You know, for instance, and it doesn't have to be that. I mean, you think of, if you just track with a train of thought, you know, when someone says, hey, are you guys going to the football game, or so-and-so going, no, they broke up. I mean, to just follow that up and say, oh, really? I thought they were good together. Why did they break up? Why do you think that relationship didn't work? I mean, you can, if you're just consistently asking the students that are in your life, if you're asking them questions, why is this way and why not? And you can track down so many topics, you know, when someone says, oh, they're not allowed to date anymore. Why is that? Her parents caught them in the basement together. Really? What did you think about that? You know, I mean, you can, if you ask what and why questions and just the things that are coming out of their life. But I think the mistake people make is they don't ask questions and they don't pursue relationship. Most things will come up if you're in the life of a 6th or 8th grader, you know, or a 10th grader, that, you know, oh, so-and-so has a curfew. Really? What's their curfew? What do you think about that? Have you seen people your age get in trouble that didn't obey a curfew, or that, you know, like almost every conversation that you want to have is going to be volunteered at some point if you have relationship and you're asking questions. So yeah, I think sometimes people think like, oh man, I've got to have a counseling degree and I've got to have an intervention and get my kid to stay home for 4 hours. It's like, no, that can be in the car when you pick them up, you know, or when they mention that one of their friends is grounded. Ask them why, ask them what they think, chase that down a little bit and pursue it. And a lot of topics are going to come up. And sometimes if something doesn't, or maybe you say, hey, I want to talk about something that could be weird. Can we go get ice cream? You know, and they'll be like, all right, I don't want to talk about a weird topic, but I do like ice cream. Okay. You know, yeah, let's do that. You know, I think you can, if there's something you just know you've got to create the conversation, there's space to do that when there's relationship.
And I think oftentimes in student ministry, if you're a youth ministry worker or volunteer, when you have those relationships, sometimes the students are the ones who will bring it up because they know that you're a safe person to talk to and to process things with. So in that scenario, what do you do if you're a youth worker and you're caught off guard, you're blindsided, maybe a student asks you a tough question that you don't have the answer to, or you're not sure how to walk them through that? You know, what's your response? How do you encourage those youth workers to handle that, to step into those situations?
Well, I just think it's always important that all of these things go back to the gospel and go back to the Bible. And that probably sounds like the most simple overstatement. But you know, if you're telling someone don't think about sex, don't have sex, that's just a rule unless they're doing that to honor Jesus with their life. And so, you know, I mean, I think you always have to let them know that, you know, I said that everything goes back to relationship and having a relationship. Let them know that your relationship with them is based on a relationship with Jesus. And so it's not just religion. You're not just being a Pharisee, but you're saying, hey, you know, Jesus purchased your body with the price of his life. And so you want to honor him with that. Let them know that principle behind it, and let them know that your definition of love isn't just because you're conservative and vote a certain way. It's because God defines love in 1 Corinthians 13. Let them know that you're not just saying, hey, someday you might want to get married because you made that up, or because you're from a rural setting and everyone gets married at 19. No, it's because God created marriage and God's pointing people toward that. And so let them know that, like, that's a very real thing, and that it's all based on the foundation of the Bible. I think that's important, because otherwise it can, you know, if there is a dust up of relationship, if someone says, oh, I don't like that youth leader, and it's like, well, you're going to hear the same thing from that youth leader and that youth leader and that parent and that pastor and that momentum speaker, because they all have the foundation of the gospel, and they're all trying to, you know, have you take steps towards Jesus. So I think that's important for them to see and know.
Yeah, that's super good. Yeah. So one question that came in, and I'll read it here. Are there any other resources outside of even scripture that you guys would recommend when it comes to dating practices or principles? What are some good resources that you guys have found that you would encourage dating couples to use?
Oh man, there's a guy named Jefferson Bethke. He and his wife, and I'm blanking on her name right now. They, from dating to marriage to even how to do date nights, how spouses, they have a ministry. I think they have a podcast. You can chase down almost any topic or any conversation anywhere in that dating spectrum that you would want. I think, you know, I've mentioned some other stuff there, you know, and some of it's older. I would say Jefferson Bethke is probably some of the most relevant stuff you could find as far as a podcast and books and resources. I did mention the Weekend to Remember family life thing. I think sometimes the longer a resource exists, you can find a story that you know, I know that people sometimes talk about focus on the family this, or, you know, and sometimes the longer something's out there, it's just that a person will misuse it, or, you know, someone does something stupid. But Dennis Rainey, they have some of those Weekend to Remember things that you talking to students about puberty, about dating, about sex. It's like any curriculum. It's not perfect, but anyone that works with kids or students knows you buy a curriculum, you adapt the half that you like, you cut out the half you don't like, and you're always contextualizing it for your students and your conversation. But those are some ones that I've really appreciated through the years.
Yeah, Kristin, anything you've gone to?
No, that about covered it.
She's married to me, so we probably have all the same ones. You know, my kids are going through Weekend to Remember, and so are hers. So yeah, it's kind of the same resources.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you guys for this. This has been a helpful conversation. I know we could go for hours on talking about all kinds of things here. You know, we didn't even touch the same-sex attraction piece. We haven't gone into. We could go deeper into purity. There's tons of things, but again, our goal today was really just to help begin this conversation and talk through with adults who have teenagers in their life who are interested in dating. What are some healthy boundaries, terms, definitions that they can use? So thank you for your time. Thank you for doing that with us. I hope that if you're watching this video and it's been of benefit for you, or you found value here, share this video with your friends. Maybe sit down with your student and watch part of it, or if there's some point that you can pull out, then we would encourage you to do that. So Mark, would you just pray for us, pray for our viewers and adults working with teens in this area?
Yeah, definitely. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for this conversation today, and I thank you so much for sending your son to die on the cross. And Lord, that's the foundation of our lives. That's the foundation of our relationships. That's the foundation of some guidelines and rules and things we talked about. God, we want to be people who honor you and people who lead ministries and lead families and disciple students and others who honor you. And so, God, we pray that you will give us an awareness of culture and where it is, the timeless principles of your word look like. God, I pray for anyone watching this and just having to facilitate tough conversations or trying to build a relationship so they can talk about things that matter. Lord, we know that this topic of dating and relationships has the potential to steer our lives in wonderful spots and also to take us off the tracks. And so, God, we pray that you'll help us to have the foresight to steer in directions and in relationships with people that would honor you. And we pray that you'll just give us the vision and the knowledge to know when something isn't headed in a great direction and doesn't have a great foundation. So we just lift up these youth leaders and parents. Pray that you'll give them wisdom and courage to just be the leader and the fulfill the biblical role you've called them to, and to know that you will bless that and you will honor that. So thanks for today. Thanks for Eric. Thanks for CE, the role it's had in my life and even in our dating and marriage relationship. And God, we just thank you for all these things, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks to our viewers who are watching this as well. And if even as Mark was just praying, if there's any thing that CE National can do where we can be a resource, we want to help equip you. So please feel free to reach out to us here at CE National. We would love to help you, to equip you if you're a parent or youth worker. If there's any questions that you even have as a result of this conversation, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you guys. Thanks, Mark and Kristin, for joining us. We're excited. We've got more digital labs coming up on a whole variety.